Quick question. If you discovered your entire life was a live reality show like The Truman Show, and everyone knew except you, how would you react? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. Our story begins with some lore about the world. For centuries, humans had stood at the pinnacle of all creation, until a strange new gene structure came and fucked shit up. The new genetic makeup was far superior to that of mere humans, giving rise to an entirely different species called Kimyos. The Kimyos were stronger, faster, better, and more resilient than humans in every conceivable way. And that was just the simplest complementary trait of their DNA. The more sophisticated aspects of their genes manifested as supernatural abilities termed talents. Although surreal, most talents were predominantly harmless. For example, the ability to manipulate simple elements and flex on the homies, or control your body's internal structure, thereby manipulating extensions of your body like bones. Some rare cases even involved altering the very cellular makeup of the body at will, enabling transformations into various non-human forms, like this pig bastard right here. Last, but certainly not least, in fact arguably the most significant trait, Kimyos could pull bitches. And I mean mad hoes, practically swimming in the huzz. Anyway, as with everything, there was an exception to the danger level of Kimyo talents. While most were generally harmless, some were truly heaven-defying. The elites among them held power strong enough to annihilate the entire world, possibly wiping out the human race. In the town of Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, amidst a bustling crowd, we are introduced to the MC of our story, Che motherfucking Hart. Introduced as the contender of the night, Che was set to face off against the human Quill. Astutely named, you guessed it, Quill. Despite the underwhelming naming sense, Quill was actually a formidable warrior, boasting an impressive record of 15 wins and 4 losses in his fighting career. Che, on the other hand, had a measly 3 wins. But don't count him out just yet, because he'd been blessed by the Maiden of War. And all 3 of those wins were against Kimyos, despite him being human himself. At the gong of the bell, Quill didn't mince words. He directly activated his talent, Porcupine. It allowed him to stretch and harden his skin and muscles, forming sharp quills like a porcupine. Emboldened by his talent, he launched a relentless assault on Che, dishing out punches and forcing him onto the defensive from the get-go. Pressing the attack, he whipped a roundhouse kick at Che, which Che barely managed to block before tumbling backward. Feeling himself, Quill paused his offensive to taunt Che, telling him to stop cowering and face him directly. How long was he planning to turtle up like a bitch? Incredulous, Che shot him a funny look. Who was he calling a turtle? Wasn't he the one with literal spikes all over his body, preventing anyone from getting close? Who was the real bitch here? Nevertheless, the challenge had been issued, and there was no way Che would cower. He shot forward, arriving at Quill's flank in an instant. Ducking below a wild jab, he reared back for a nasty rib punch, but Quill was one step ahead, deploying his talent and spiking the shit out of Che. Forced to retreat, Che cursed the bastard. Who was he calling a cowering bitch again? Still, this was a superhuman fight. Complaining was pointless. Locking in, Che quickly deduced the weakness of the porcupine bastard. He couldn't maintain his quills for long, probably 30 to 60 seconds tops. Surprised he'd been figured out, Quill kept up his cocky bravado, taunting Che even more, telling him to come at him. Che said bet and zoomed forward, bobbing and weaving through Quill's defenses. Spotting an opening, he darted in with a quick punch, rocking Quill's shit before withdrawing just as the talent reactivated. Just like that, the tables turned, with Che dominating through careful, lightning-fast attacks. Spinning on his feet, Che lunged in for a devastating kick primed to end the fight in one move. But the smirk on Quill's lips made it obvious. This was exactly what he'd been waiting for. A trap. Sure enough, he activated his talent on his arms, waiting for Che to land the kick and screw himself royally. But contrary to his expectations, Che had seen through it. Withdrawing his attack, he landed gracefully, completing his feint before shooting forward to clock Quill in the gut. The unexpected move left Quill completely defenseless, and he was flung away like a rag doll. Not one to miss opportunities, Che closed in with a left jab. Quill countered by activating his talent on his face, preventing any attack there. But once again, it was only a feint. The real attack slammed into his gut. Suffering 2 consecutive losses and being made a fool of, Quill finally snapped. He grabbed Che's arm and decided to play dirty, activating his talent and spiking the shit out of Che's hand, making sure the Huz wouldn't get any loving tonight. But Che tanked the pain and smiled broadly. He had him. Since Quill had already used his talent on his stomach, his jaw was wide open for a counterattack. Before Quill could curse his blunder, Che rocked his shit again, this time sending him straight to sleep. With a sickening thud, the poor bastard was laid out cold. We switched scenes to the locker room, 1 hour after the fight. Although he managed to win, Che was still just a mortal fighting a superhuman, so it was inevitable his shit would be rocked a little. He stood by the sink, nursing his wounds, while the commentary of another match echoed in the background, this one bloodier than his own, a true Kimyo versus Kimyo fight. Flexing his six-pack abs and manly physique, no homo, Che barely had enough time to admire himself before trouble came knocking. A duo of sketchy-looking dudes who clearly came for the smoke. As expected, the trouble-seeking pair clicked their tongues in annoyance before stating their purpose. They wanted compensation. Apparently, they'd bet big on Quill winning, so Che's victory was unacceptable. They threatened him to cough up cash, or else they'd really fuck him up. And he better not get any wild ideas about playing hero. They knew he was tired from his fight against Quill. Bleeding malice, they advised him to comply or face violence. Che sighed and told them to close the door. Like the iconic scene from Kingsman, he was about to manners maketh man on their asses. The goons said bet and stepped forward, whipping out knives ready for the tango. Fast forward a few minutes later. We shift to the building's lobby. Behind the counter sat a receptionist who, for lack of a better word, was hot and bothered. Seriously simping for our boy Che. Like a damsel in heat, she flashed back to their earlier encounter, her cheeks flushing at the memory. Che had walked right up to her and called her by name. Demalia. That alone was enough to get the down-bad maiden soaked. Exploiting the opening, she shot her shot, telling Che he looked particularly charming tonight, especially with the new scars, which only made him hotter. Che nonchalantly thanked her, clearly uninterested, but Demalia wasn't one to give up easily. Feigning an aggrieved tone, she invited him to a celebration party afterward, accusing him of never making time for her on the side. Didn't he know she was a prime maiden, ripe and ready to be picked? Unbothered, Che gave her the same flat reply. He'd be busy at home and wouldn't make it. Seemingly getting the hint, Demalia sighed and retrieved Che's earnings for the night. But before handing it over, she tried one last time, telling Che to look for her if he ever got cold. In other words, if he wanted cheeks, he knew who to reach. Pocketing the cash, Che said, okay. If he ever hit a drought, he'd seek her out. Then, as if remembering something, he told Demalia to send someone to his locker room. Some unfortunate souls seemed to have slipped and fell in there. Fast forward again, now to Che's home. Like a true protagonist, he monologued. Pain, although undesirable, lets us know we're alive. But why endure such pain? Why torture his body fighting superhumans while being just a mortal? He didn't say, but there was a greater motive behind it, one he hoped wasn't in vain. The following morning, a car was parked outside Che's house. By the car stood 2 figures, constantly roasting him. The woman said Che was probably inside disappointing a lady, dishing out weak strokes, which explained his lateness. The man countered that she was being too generous. No woman would tolerate Che long enough to even offer the cheeks. Exiting the house, Che overheard their chatter. His lips twitched. Did these fools really have nothing better to talk about? Ignoring them, he turned to Tevin, already knowing what was coming. As expected, Tevin called him out. He'd known Che for 15 years, and in the 7 years Che had lived in that apartment, no one had ever been inside. What was he hiding? Drugs or something? Che brushed off the accusations, got in the car, and told them to drive. Destination: the gym. Arriving at Red Ember Gym, Che looked at the building with a warm smile. This was his dojo, his home. Meanwhile, inside, an intense spar was underway. A Kimyo whipped a heavy kick toward an old man. This old man was Leo Thomas, a war hero of the Kimyo versus Human War, and the owner of the dojo. Che described him as a kind but strict man, who treated them like his own sons, and gave rogues from poor backgrounds like them a way out. As for what exactly happened in the human versus Kimyo War, and what atrocities took place, that's a story for another time. Back to the spar. The Kimyo's kick was effortlessly dodged as Leo casually stepped aside. Persistent, the Kimyo readjusted and launched an unceasing barrage. Unfazed, Leo blocked and parried every strike before forcing him to retreat. Not relenting, the Kimyo blitzed to Leo's blind spot, aiming to catch him off guard. But as expected of an old man in a world where men die young, Leo wasn't to be underestimated. He intercepted the Kimyo, blocking a super punch with a single arm. Then, as if possessed by the ghost of Kung Fu, he blitzed the shit out of him, landing a flurry of punches before finishing with a savage palm strike that sent the Kimyo flying. But Leo wasn't done. Just before the Kimyo could soar off into the distance, Leo grabbed him and yanked him back into the fray. Using a judo technique, he flipped the poor bastard, sending him airborne like a hawk, only to yank him back again. Tossed, turned, and primed for a devastating finisher. The Kimyo could only watch in despair. Without suspense, Leo clocked his shit with a sidekick, laying him out flat. The force hurled him out of the arena, close enough for Che to witness his pitiful fate. Chuckling mockingly, Tevin told Che he was cooked. Once the master saw his broken face, his fate would be worse than that poor bastard. Clapping back, Che told him not to worry. He didn't need sympathy from a man-child still being chauffeured around by his girl. Fuming, Tevin took the loss in silence. Back in the ring, Leo's harsh but dedicated coaching continued. As the old man polished the young Kimyo's ass, Che and Tevin regrouped with the boys. They pitied Azam, who was getting his shit rocked by Leo. Then one of them suddenly remembered and called out to Che, telling him to get ready. The master had been looking for him. With those foreboding words, the spar ended, and Leo turned his gaze on Che, summoning him to the stage. Sweating profusely, Che stuttered a whimper before reluctantly dragging himself forward. Once there, he immediately folded under Leo's stern gaze. Like a disappointed father, Leo scolded him for his carelessness. What would happen if he faced a powerful Kimyo and ended up dead? Would he be happy then? Enraged, Leo slapped Che, venting some anger. Head buzzing and vision blurred, Che scampered away, fearing another beating. Leo sighed in disappointment, about to start the day's lesson. But before he could, a loud clap rang out, drawing everyone's attention. Following the clap came a sinister voice, asking why Leo seemed so tense. Was his age finally catching up to him? Enter the first villain of the story, Rokash Rampersad, a narcissistic bastard who'd made a name for himself in Trinidad. Recently ranked among the top 150 strongest Kimyos, his ego inflated to unbearable levels, earning him the hatred of nearly everyone. Though strong, he was now the most despised man in the country. Cho didn't know any of these guys, so he asked his master directly, "Who was this cocky bastard?" Tevin chimed in, seeking the same clarification. He then questioned the trio. Hadn't they seen the sign prohibiting visits during training hours? Or were they illiterate? The boys lined up, showing their unified stance. Rokash, this sinister bastard, was not welcome there. Feeling the hostility, Rokash clicked his tongue in annoyance. How was Leo raising trash like this? Was this really how they greeted their master's former student? Shocked, the disciples looked at Leo incredulously. Was it true? Rokash was once part of them? But then, remembering their master's unyielding rejection of Rokash, they shelved their doubts and told the trio to leave. Rokash and his people clapped back, saying they weren't going anywhere. If they were that adamant about chasing them away, then they could settle it with a good-spirited, hot-blooded spar. Nothing beats the clapping of fresh cheeks in the morning after all. Fed up, Leo released his aura, the overwhelming flame power concealed within. His body burst into golden flames, scorching the very air around him. Furious, he told Rokash to leave. This was his last chance. He wouldn't give him another. Though humiliated, Rokash was truly humbled by the overwhelming power radiating from Leo. He had no choice but to swallow his grievance and turn to leave. But before he did, as typical of a budget villain, he left a final threat behind. Leo shouldn't think he was hot fire, literally. The world had changed, and several formidable people had emerged. He was no longer the peak of Kimyo power, nor did he have a clue of what true strength looked like. But he shouldn't worry, because Rokash would enlighten him soon enough. Too bad that knowledge might come at the cost of his worthless life, and sooner than he thought. Having said so, Rokash swaggered calmly out of the dojo. Time swiftly passed, and soon dusk arrived. While cleaning the gym, Che's thoughts kept flicking back to the earlier altercation. Unable to suppress his curiosity any longer, he asked Leo directly, what was up with that bastard? And what was all that talk about him being a former student? Leo replied that Rokash was indeed a former student, but his arrogance and vile nature had caused a falling out. Still, one thing remained true. Rokash was one of the strongest disciples he had ever taught. Drunk on his power and constantly craving validation, Rokash often challenged other disciples, beating them down just to prove his strength. He relished standing above others, grinning and jesting, taking his victories further and further, until he finally crossed a line he shouldn't have. One day, behind Leo's back, he organized a spar against a fellow disciple, Jacob. Things got out of control, and Rokash ended up killing him. The whole thing blew up, and the police were called to investigate. But with limited evidence, it was ruled an unintentional homicide, the result of carelessness during the fight. Rokash left the dojo after that, and hadn't returned, until now. Incredulous, Che was shocked that Rokash had managed to get away with murder just like that. Clicking his tongue, he told his master not to worry. If Rokash ever showed his stupid face there again, he and the boys would kick his ass. Leo chuckled and threw some teasing jabs at him. Touched, he told Che to head out. He must have his own business to handle. Fast forward to later that day at the clinic. Coming in for a checkup, Che patiently waited for the doctor's arrival. Upon entering, the two, clearly fond of each other, exchanged some good-natured banter. The doctor reported that his daughter was pregnant again, expecting her 6th child. Shocked, Che looked at him incredulously. That daughter of his was truly a freak, obsessed with the meat. But aside from that, did he have what Che needed? The doctor nodded and listed off what sounded like an entire pharmacy's worth of prescriptions. He'd even added a new drug to the mix, guaranteed to help with Che's internal bleeding. Then, remembering his last visit, he asked about Che's eye. Any improvements? Che replied that he hadn't felt any. His visibility was still at 60%. At this, the doctor dropped his carefree attitude and advised him seriously. He should really consider abandoning his fighting career. Sure, his body was stronger than most, likely thanks to Leo's training, but he was still just a mortal. Fighting Kimyos had pushed his body to the limit, and it wasn't an exaggeration to say he was lucky to be alive. His body was a complete mess. Even spending an entire evening listing defects wouldn't cover it all. He should seriously consider retiring before he dropped dead one day. Surely the money from the fight club couldn't be worth that much, right? Smiling sadly, Che replied that he had no choice. Although he appreciated the doctor's concern, this was something he had to do, especially since the money was for a good cause. He thanked the doctor again, then put on a big, cheerful smile. He was a tough boy, he'd be all right. The doctor sighed and wisely let the matter go. It wasn't his place to meddle anymore. Bidding farewell, he wished Che the best and encouraged him to seek him out should he ever need help. Che said bet, and immediately thought of his succubus daughter. Maybe he should aspire to be her 7th baby daddy. Jokes aside, he quickly bid the doctor goodbye and left the clinic. Back at the dojo, a foreboding pressure lingered in the air. As if waiting for someone, Leo calmly flicked through his Bible. Soon, to his disappointment, the doorknob turned, and someone walked in. That someone was Rokash, veiled in shadows, releasing an overwhelming killing intent. The night promised to be long and messy. Meanwhile, on Che's side, the oblivious MC was on the phone with Tevin, discussing Rokash's threat to their master. Tevin told him not to worry. Although a psycho, he doubted Rokash was heartless enough to actually harm the man who had made him. Che agreed, but still decided to check on Leo the next morning. It was always best to be careful. Tevin supported the idea but quickly excused himself, fearing the wrath of his girl for being on the phone too long. Besides, the succubus was giving him the look, so he knew shit was about to go down. All aboard to Pound Town. Meanwhile, back at the Red Ember Gym, things had taken an unfortunate turn. The whole building was up in flames, the result of the clash between Leo and Rokash. Amidst a sea of fire, Leo stood tall, glaring down at the defeated Rokash. Unfortunately, things weren't as simple as they seemed. Despite being the clear winner, Leo was wounded, a fatal gunshot to the gut. He glared at the cause of his injury, a bastard wielding a gun on the side. Enraged, Rokash scolded his nephew. Why had he intervened? Hadn't he made it clear Leo was his to kill? But before his nephew could justify himself, Leo suddenly appeared before him, bathed in flames, having used the Phoenix Spear technique to accelerate. He punched the nephew in the gut, sending him crashing into the wall. Once done, he turned his attention back to Rokash, scolding him for his lack of honor. Was this how he'd raised his nephew? To sneak attack people during a duel? Enraged, Rokash finally let out the emotions buried in his heart. He accused Leo of overlooking him, always refusing to acknowledge his strength despite all his efforts to make their dojo the best. As for Jacob, that weakling shouldn't have accepted his challenge if he knew he was too weak. Furious, Leo cut him off, telling him to shut his mouth. He wasn't worthy of speaking Jacob's name ever again. Sighing, Leo confessed that the gunshot wound was fatal. He wouldn't make it through the night. But before he died, he had to correct his past mistakes, namely Rokash and his twisted, sinister ways. Burning in divine flames, he began Rokash's rehabilitation. First lesson: a parent's tough love. Rokash roared in defiance and told him to come at him. Leo didn't hesitate and shot forward, arriving before Rokash with a whipping knee kick. Rokash barely had enough time to block before the unexpected heavy blow knocked the wind out of him. Leo didn't let up and continued the combo with a powerful left jab before effortlessly dodging Rokash's counterattack. He inched closer, closing the gap before striking with a brutal 1-inch punch. The blow sent Rokash reeling, and he wailed like a bitch as he coughed up a mouthful of fresh blood. Not satisfied, Leo advanced the attack. He grabbed Rokash by the collar and yeeted him into the air like a rag doll. Pressing the attack, he channeled his flames to his feet, shooting off like a rocket launched into deep space. Within a second, he'd closed in on Rokash, clipping him on the side as he shot by. Then, as if guided by the god of Kung Fu, he somersaulted in the air, changed trajectory, and shot back at Rokash with unbridled fury. Channeling his don't look back no jutsu, he spawned behind the petrified Rokash and blasted him with a devastating firepalm strike. Not relenting, he pushed the assault further, activating his secret technique, Ilios Descending Meteor. Endless plumes of fire bellowed out as Leo's body burst forward with unbelievable momentum. An all-annihilating heat radiated from him, consuming the very air around him, rocketing him toward Rokash in an instant. Merciless, he unleashed all that momentum, stomping Rokash on the chest and burying that treacherous bastard into the ground, layered with flames, heat, and wrath. With that done, Leo finally paused his severe ass-whooping and assessed his condition. Things weren't looking good. Although he was overwhelmingly strong, so strong that whooping a top 150 Kimyo like Rokash was child's play. Everything eventually succumbed to time. He was just too old to survive a fatal wound like the one he had. Even as he spoke, he could already feel the last embers of his life slipping away. Enraged, he shifted his fury to Rokash, his voice tinged with loathing and regret. He commended him for his shamelessness, daring to attack only after his strength had deteriorated with age. But he shouldn't smile just yet, because Leo would make sure he paid dearly for his actions. With those words, he blitzed out of existence, only to reappear before Rokash, his fingers inches from the bastard's eye. Like a grim reaper signaling the death knell, he whispered gravely into Rokash's ear. This would be his punishment, a maiming to remind him of his failure for the rest of his life. Then without hesitation, he dug into Rokash's eye socket, plucking out an eyeball with gore spilling after. Torturous wailing followed as Rokash rolled on the ground, lamenting the agonizing loss of his eye. Leo, however, smiled contentedly, relishing the screams while still holding on to the plucked eye. It was only after his nephew came to him that Rokash snapped out of his frenzy and sobered up. The building was on fire. They couldn't stay there any longer. Turning to the smiling Leo, Rokash barked all the venom in his heart. Old and overpowered. Who did he think he was? Netero? He better stop with that smiling in the face of death bullshit. In any case, the victor is king, and this would be Leo's grave. Who would know he laminated Rokash's cheeks today? No one. That truth would follow him into his blazing grave. Then, not wasting any more time with the dying man, Rokash turned and scurried away. Left alone in the burning dojo, Leo Thomas finally took his last breath. In his moment of passing, he had but one regret. CHADY. Fast forward a few days later, beneath a wailing sky, Leo's send-off was underway. Friends and family gathered, all reunited to bid their final goodbyes to the legendary hero. Kind words were spoken, but to the disciples burning with vengeance, it was all nonsense. They glanced at each other, already knowing what came next. One of them, a sword eyebrow-looking motherfucker, was the first to speak, asking what the hell they were doing. They already knew Rokash was the culprit, so why the hell were they still sitting on their asses? A second one, who low-key looked like a shady pastor, chimed in, announcing that Rokash would be holding a tournament in a month. The winner of the tournament would get the opportunity to fight him one-on-one, his sick way of celebrating his entry into the top 150 Kimyos while rewarding the victor. If they wanted a clean shot at him, the tournament was their best bet. The group collectively turned to CHADY, asking him to represent them. Only 2 from each dojo could register for the tournament, and they wanted CHADY to be one of them. Amused, CHADY asked what the hell they were smoking. He was the only one in the group without powers. How did it make sense for him to register? Tevin stepped in, glazing him a little bit. He told CHADY he was blessed in combat, a fact even their late master had acknowledged. Although no one knew why the goddess of war favored him so much, handing out cheeks of talent whenever he asked, the fact remained that he was the most gifted of them all. If he represented them, their chances of winning would surely rise. Besides, he wouldn't be alone. Tevin would fight alongside him, and their master's vengeance would be just around the corner. CHADY looked up at them and agreed without hesitation. They already had the who, when, and where. So what the hell were they waiting for? Cheeks needed to be clapped. Meanwhile, on Rokash's side, the treacherous bastard was swimming in PTSD. Memories of his ass-whooping kept flashing through his mind, making his grip on the armchair involuntarily tighten. Though enraged and embarrassed, he couldn't do anything about it. He'd lost miserably to the geezer Leo Thomas. Consoling himself, he decided to wait for the tournament. Maybe by then the sickening defeat in his heart would have disappeared. Fast forward 4 months later, at the Rokash Combat Stadium, the venue for the fight. The whole group had assembled, including Tevin's girl who, from this angle, looked hella thick. What a lucky bastard. Speaking first, the sketchy pastor informed CHADY and Tevin that he'd already booked a changing room for them. All they had to do was register and wait. But he advised caution. The first day was stacked with heavy hitters, the tournament's way of building hype. Picking up on this, Tevin's girl glared daggers at him. She warned him to be careful, or else she'd kill him herself. As for the consequences of getting hurt, he already knew. No sucky for an entire month. The gang burst into laughter at Tevin's predicament. They wanted to roast the simp, but an announcement from the TV caught their attention. The news feature was about their mortal enemy, Rokash Rampersad. Unbridled killing intent filled the room as the gang collectively turned to the screen. Their faces twisted with murderous rage, seconds away from crashing out. But as expected, the TV was an inanimate object, uncaring of their feelings, so the feature rolled on. It introduced Rokash Rampersad, Trinidad and Tobago's first Kimyo to be ranked in the top 150 strongest fighters. Not only was he a so-called prodigy, he was also a self-made millionaire with businesses spanning multiple industries: real estate, fashion, hotels, and more. Though already a 61-year-old geezer, he was still the darling of many women, having pulled and slayed countless maidens in his time. But Rokash wasn't just about looks. He was also a formidable fighter, with an impressive record of 46 wins and only 3 losses in his professional career. It was no wonder the news called him a prodigy, minus the questionable trouble with the police over Jacob's death. The feature wrapped up by shading light on what they called a challenging time for Rokash, the death of his former master and mentor, Leo Thomas. They didn't go into detail, but twisted the story to portray Rokash as the loyal disciple mourning his master's death and out for revenge. This enraged the gang, who collectively cursed him for his shamelessness. But now wasn't the time for sentiment. The tournament was about to begin. Pulling up his hoodie, CHADY instructed the boys to move out. He was done listening to that paid propaganda bullshit. The boys agreed and followed him into the changing room. Meanwhile, the feature continued, spinning excuses for Rokash's recent scars and injuries. They claimed it was a combat scar, earned in a righteous duel of honor. They even glazed him further, saying the scars made him look more intriguingly intimidating than before. Shifting scenes, were taken to the gang's changing room, where strategies were being laid out. Bootleg Mike Tyson, the team's information mule, explained the tournament's specifics. Fights would be brutal contests, meaning participants were encouraged to kill each other to win instantly. Though shocked, Tevin decided to proceed, but begged the boys to keep the truth from his girl. Who knew what crazy shit she'd pull if she found out? Actually, he did know. No sucky for an entire year. That is, if she didn't kill him first. Anyway, it was too late to turn back now. Time to get ready. Hearing his name, Tevin confidently walked onto the arena. In the stands, his thicker-than-gravy girlfriend cheered for him. Opposite him stood his opponent, who low-key thought he was the MC, Sunraz the Untouched. And no, untouched didn't mean he was a tragic virgin, a maidenless loser. It meant he was a speedster Kimyo with unparalleled speed, and had never once been injured in his career. Amused, Tevin commented on the matchup. A speedster Kimyo versus a tank, these organizers sure knew how to pick. But if they thought this was enough to beat him, they'd be gravely disappointed. He didn't care whether Sunraz was the fastest Kimyo, untouched by maidens. He was the toughest Kimyo, and the bastard would never get past his defense. Before he could finish his glazing, Sunraz spawned behind him, shocking the shit out of him. Tevin barely had time to react before he was whipped to the floor. Enraged, he looked up to see Sunraz glaring at him with undisguised contempt. He told Tevin he was no match, that countless others had failed to lay a finger on him, and Tevin would be no exception. Tevin fumed and punched forward, only to be dodged and counterattacked, kicked square in the gut. He barely regained his senses when a second Sunraz appeared behind him, followed by a third, trapping him dangerously between them. Shady Pastor, the group's strategist, explained what was happening. Sunraz's talent was called Image Fusion Threshold. In short, he moved so fast his afterimages had time to materialize, creating duplicates of himself. Could that information help Tevin? Hell no. The homie was already getting his shit rocked. Chase shouted for him to get his guard up, but Tevin shouted back that he was trying. The untouched bastard was just too damn fast. All he could do was grit his teeth and take the beating. As the punches and kicks rained down, fury built in Tevin's heart. His girl was in the stands, watching him get clowned. How could he allow that? Locking in, he began his Kimyo transformation. With a deafening roar, he unleashed his energy, blasting Sunraz back. Under the shocked gaze of his opponent, he revealed his true form, Rhino Hide, a talent that let him create a protective shell over his body, massively boosting both defense and offense. Seeing this, Sunraz's reaction was a little peculiar. The dude literally said, "And I shit you not, Nani?" I was like, who the fuck does this guy think he is? An anime protagonist or some shit? In any case, his questionable response didn't stop him from acting accordingly, narrowly dodging Tevin's mighty punch. The force from that single punch kicked up dust storms, showing just how mighty the transformed simp was, and delighting Sunraz for his astute decision to dodge. Otherwise, his shit would have been baked. But even then, things weren't as hopeless as he'd imagined. Dodging another jab, he quickly activated his talent, zooming away from Tevin and buying himself enough breathing room to think. Through the MC's insistent chatter, he finally gleaned the details of Tevin's talent, and he could sum it up in one word: brute. The dude was basically a walking war machine, but instead of despairing, Sunraz became elated. Though tanky, Tevin was now even more vulnerable to his speed than before, his agility greatly reduced because of the thick armor. Sunraz immediately stopped hesitating and pressed the attack, running circles around his helpless foe. Noticing this, Tevin realized his blunder. It seemed his transformation had been too hasty. He hadn't thought things through, but he was already in it, so he might as well deal with it and worry about the consequences later. With that in mind, he tanked up, focusing entirely on his defense. He wholeheartedly trusted his talent and believed Sunraz would never get past his hide. Unfortunately, reality was often disappointing. Sunraz pierced through that shit like butter, ruthlessly kneeing him in the chin. Tevin barely had time to regain his senses before a second attack landed. Seeing this, Che shouted at him to get his shit together. Why was he just taking hits? Had he forgotten the master's teachings? Find the opponent's weakness, goddammit. According to Leo, talents were exactly as their name suggested, talents. They could either be nurtured or neglected, but one thing always remained the same. Every talent had a weakness. In some cases, the talent's greatest strength, when looked at from another angle, became its greatest weakness. He called that the blind spot of talents. Reflecting on this teaching, Tevin continued his desperate struggle, clumsily fending off Sunraz's barrage while trying to find his weakness. He endured several more rounds of ass-whooping before a feasible solution finally emerged: destroy the ground. Since this speedster bastard required a firm footing to use his talent, what would happen if Tevin destroyed the ground? There was only one way to find out. The next time Sunraz charged at him, his eyes crimson with killing intent, Tevin confidently shouted at him to bring it on. He had a whole can of whoop-ass to serve. Then, without hesitation, he raised his leg and stomped hard on the floor, completely destroying the arena ground. Caught off guard by the unexpected attack, Sunraz was momentarily dazed, unable to react to the bizarre change. It was only when he saw Tevin rear his hand back that he knew he was beyond cooked. Smirking, Tevin told the trapped Sunraz he shouldn't have fucked with him. Because of the damage he'd dealt, Tevin's girl would punish him by withholding sloppy toppy for an entire month, and such grievances had to be avenged. Thus, as he reared his hand back for a finisher, the terror on Sunraz's face made him even more delighted. With undisguised fury and resentment, he punched the absolute shit out of Sunraz, sending the speedster flying like a ragdoll. The poor fellow was almost launched into space, were it not for the protective shield surrounding the arena. It's safe to say the sudden change caught everyone off guard. The entire audience took a second to digest it. Then, as if by prior arrangement, deafening cheers thundered from the stands, all chanting Tevin's name. The once mighty speedster was quickly forgotten, his battered body carried away by the medical team. With the match won, Tevin powered down and regrouped with the squad. His girl was also there, and I gotta say, this maiden was turning out more cake than I thought. Just look at that squishy squeeze. Damn. Enjoying the soft melons, Tevin regained his senses long enough to ask about Che. Where the hell was that bastard? Shady Preacher replied that Che was getting ready, preparing himself for his fight. However, there was an unsettling aura about him that he found quite troublesome. Their plan for participating in the tournament was to expose Rokash, but he doubted Che would maintain his rationality if he encountered the bastard. It was best they prepared for any unexpected events. Meanwhile, in the arena, the next matchup was already being announced. In one corner was the homie Che, a certified badass and formidable fighter despite his mortal limitations. In the other was the freak, mutant, and human hunter Nanaku. The dude was a bona fide psychopath, only participating in BC battles to kill and torment his opponents. Sensing the overwhelming malice, Che instinctively frowned. This bastard. Just how many people had he killed for his aura to be that bloody? Nanaku, however, ignored his disgusted face and expressed his frustration. This was meant to be his big debut, his great name resounding all over Trinidad and Tobago. How dare they match him up with a mere mortal? Were they fucking with him? Well, it didn't matter. He'd just kill Che and move on to bigger prey. As for Che, this talentless loser, he was already a dead man. Why would he bother with an appetizer cheek meant to be clapped while he waited for better prey? He was already being generous by granting him the opportunity of dying by his hands. Che listened to the diss and warned sternly that Nanaku should get the hell out of his way. He had family business to handle. Nanaku replied with a mocking chuckle. If he wanted him out of the way, then he had to come and do it himself. Thus the duo squared off, beginning the bout as soon as the gong rang. Nanaku opened with a claw strike, but Che easily parried that shit and countered with a gut punch. Dodging, Nanaku sidestepped and grabbed Che's hand, opening him up for a counterattack. But Che reacted quickly, freeing himself and whipping a roundhouse kick toward Nanaku's face. Forced to block, the fish bastard parried the attack before continuing his offensive. Meanwhile, by the sidelines, some interested parties were paying close attention to the fight. One of them was Rokash, who recognized Che as Leo's disciple. The others were the squad, loudly cheering for their boy and hoping Che would win. Taking advantage of the moment, Sword Eyebrow Dude asked Nanaku's team what talent he had. Was he a shark or something? Nanaku's boy, smirking coldly, told him to wait and see. His question would be answered soon enough. Sure enough, things were heating up in the arena. After exchanging multiple moves, the duo upped the ante with Nanaku whipping a kick toward Che. The latter barely dodged by leaning back, then capitalized on the opening and rushed in for an elbow strike, forcing Nanaku into defending. The two exchanged several more intense blows before meeting halfway with palm strikes. Leaning closer, Nanaku taunted Che. How did it feel to smell his own death? Had he ever thought he'd die so pathetically? Well, he shouldn't be sad. He wasn't the only one. Several others had died by his hands, and Che would just be another. But before he croaked, shouldn't he show a more terrified face? How could he relish his death otherwise? Che clicked his tongue in annoyance and tuned out the psycho. His only reply to Nanaku's creepy words was a vicious stomp on the chest, sending the bastard flying. Regaining his composure, Nanaku shrugged off the blow and tore off his shirt. This was exactly what he loved most, a prey that fought for its survival. Well then, should they get serious? It was about time he grilled the marinated cheeks. Ignoring the sussy comments, Che issued his last warning. Nanaku should really get the hell out of his way. He had a mission to accomplish. Still confident, Nanaku repeated his previous answer. If Che wanted him gone, he knew what to do. Che didn't hesitate. He punched forward, clocking Nanaku in the face. However, contrary to the dazed reaction he expected, the shark bastard burst out laughing. Was that all he had? Feeling an ominous premonition, Che immediately ducked, narrowly avoiding a lethal claw to the neck. If he'd been a second slower, the attack would have ripped out his throat. Nevertheless, he quickly calmed himself and countered with a backhand elbow strike, rocking Nanaku a little. Fed up with the games, Nanaku gave Che the Wayne Brady special, choking a bitch. He lifted him into the air, smirking evilly at the trapped prey. Then, without hesitation, he clawed into Che's chest, slashing out a gash of flesh. Terrified, the gang turned pale at the sight. Who knew things would change so drastically? Nanaku's boys, however, laughed mockingly. This was just the beginning. Things were about to get more interesting. Back in the arena, Che distanced himself to recover. Nanaku didn't pursue him, and instead shifted his attention to the sputtered blood. Slurping it up, he taunted Che, saying his blood tasted delicious. Wouldn't it be better if he bled more for him? Che ignored him and checked his wound. It wasn't looking good. The shark bastard had ripped through his armor and shredded his flesh. It would be a miracle if he could exert even 50% of his power. Nevertheless, the mission had to continue. He changed his strategy, opting to run down the clock. With that in mind, he attacked passively, throwing punches only when cornered. Of course, Nanaku picked up on this and advanced mercilessly, palming Che in the face. He chained the attack with a flying sidekick, yeeting Che halfway across the arena. Bloody and battered, Che shakily rose to his feet. He expected a finisher attack, but Nanaku's advance never came. Instead, the psycho went for the sputtered blood, slurping it up with delight. Delirious, Nanaku quivered in ecstasy, thoroughly enjoying the taste. His throat continuously gulped as he lost himself in the feeling. Finally, just as I was about to question what the hell was going on and chant, "Why are you gay at this freaky bastard?" he regained his senses and faced Che. With a psychotic laugh, he charged forward, yelling that he couldn't decide what to do anymore. Should he pin Che's head on a spike or store his heart in a jar? He couldn't decide, and it was driving him crazy. Taken aback by the psychotic behavior, Che hit him with the "don't get close no jutsu." He distanced himself from the lunatic, preparing for the next stage of the fated fight. Nanaku, on the other hand, pressed his advantage, clipping Che on the cheeks, thigh, and arms. He constantly advanced the attack, leaving Che no room to breathe. Finally, when he'd drawn enough blood, he hit Che with some wordplay, some budget Shakespeare-level poetry. The more you bleed, the less you breathe. I get what he means by that, but damn, isn't whooping his ass enough? Why does he have to recite poetry while doing it? What disrespect. The gang, witnessing Che's utter destruction in the arena, shouted for him to lock in. Did he forget the master's teachings? He should find the blind spot now, goddammit. Nanaku's boys, however, laughed at their futile and pitiful resistance. The hunting ground had already been set, and there was nothing they could do about it. Hearing those ominous words, Louise, the sword eyebrow dude, wondered what the hell they were talking about. What hunting ground? Exactly what were these bastards planning now? The thugs didn't keep him guessing for long and explained it clearly. It was already too late to change anything anyway, so what harm would telling him do? They revealed that once Nanaku draws first blood, the fight is essentially won. That's because upon drawing blood, he enters a hunting state where the opponent's blood fuels his instincts, leading to a transformation. The more you bleed, the faster the transformation, and the stronger he becomes. True to this, Nanaku's aura visibly changed, pressing down on everyone. The bloody, frenzied energy terrified Che, who was trapped with him in the arena. Realizing the unfavorable turn of events, Shady Pastor proposed stopping the fight. Their revenge wasn't as important as saving Che's life. However, Nanaku's boys told him to save his breath. Like they'd said before, it was too late to stop it now. Their boy was as good as dead. With those words, one of them gestured toward the arena, telling the squad to behold Nanaku's new form, and, by extension, the destruction of their beloved friend. Following the gesture, the group flicked their gazes over, only for their faces to freeze a second later, their skin turning ghostly pale. Nanaku had transformed into a gigantic, shredded beast of calamity, towering over Che. Its roar, or whatever the fuck sharks did to exert dominance, thundered in the arena, grating in the ears of all who heard it. Without a doubt, things had taken a disastrous turn. Watching from the sidelines, Rokash chuckled at Che's plight. What would he do now? Continue fighting and die a dog's death? Or surrender and cower away like a bitch? He was looking forward to seeing his choice. Meanwhile, Shady Pastor took one look at the transformed Nanaku, and his face changed drastically. At first, he'd thought the transformation was the worst of it, but it turned out that was just the beginning of their nightmare. The state Nanaku was in wasn't a mere transformation. The bastard was a state talent user, meaning so long as the conditions were met, he could continually maintain a buffed state. In Nanaku's case, the condition was blood. When in the presence of blood, either from his enemies or just blood lying around, he could enter a transformation that significantly increased his strength. So long as that remained the case, he could continuously maintain his overpowered state, leaving Che in a perilous situation. The fight had to be stopped, and it had to be stopped now. The gang agreed, but would they make it in time? Nanaku was already on the move, after all. Over at the battlefield, Nanaku cackled evilly as he lunged at Che. His sheer momentum sent shivers down Che's back, forcing him to dodge pathetically to the side, narrowly avoiding a stomp to the death. Regaining his footing, he pressed closer, unleashing a three-piece combo on Nanaku. However, the transformed behemoth just shrugged it off, grinning widely at Che's pitiful resistance. He counterattacked, punching Che in the face, then following up with a knee to the gut. Luckily, Che was incredibly nimble, so he blocked the attack and circled behind Nanaku, using a foot technique that left zero openings for exploitation. Positioned behind his foe, Che didn't hesitate to lock him in a bear hug before suplexing the shit out of his fishy ass. The attack left Nanaku reeling, further cracking a good portion of the arena. Unfortunately, not even that could stop the crazed hunter. He quickly shook off his dizziness before laying his hands on Che. Where the hell did he think he was going? The fun was just beginning. Saying so, he yeeted Che into the air and, in front of everyone, planted his face into the ground. The sickening squelch of breaking bones was enough to silence everyone. Well, everyone except Taven's thick girl, who took that chance to cop a feel, running her caramel-like hands over his abs and whispering things about Black Mamba and a quickie. What a heartless yet extremely thick woman. Anyway, jokes aside, Che was really going through it. His face was disfigured, several teeth missing, and his eyes were puffed and bloody, shedding tears of crimson. He was, by all means, a broken doll barely clinging to life. Regardless, Nanaku didn't feel like this was enough. He cocked his hand back for a follow-up attack, mocking Che with some dis no jutsu. He flamed him for overestimating himself, daring to face him. Hopefully his pitiful defeat would be a lesson for all those arrogant humans who believed they could stand against a Kimyo. Let his blood and death be their final warning. From then on, he vowed to kill and torture every arrogant human who dared enter a Kimyo tournament. Then, As if toying with his prey, he punched Che again, sending the poor bastard flying into the distance. Walking up to him, he recited some Shakespeare, or maybe some Fang Yuan-level poetry, before embarking on his murderous tirade. "This will be the end of you," he said. "But don't worry. I'm a gentle, compassionate person and a lover. I'll make sure to escort you to the afterlife painlessly and swiftly." Hearing this, Tevin snapped. Fuck that. First he beat his ass, then recited poetry, and now he was hinting at clapping his ass? Like hell he'd let that happen. He shouted at the referee to stop the fight. Their boy was about to get violated in there. Shady Pastor joined in, yelling for the fight to stop and demanding that the gate be opened immediately. Unfortunately, things were moving way too fast for their pleas to matter. Nanaku was already on the prowl, claws stretched out for a decapitating strike. Witnessing this, Rokash shook his head in disappointment. To think he'd once been worried about this bug. He'd feared a connection with the legendary S-Heart, but it turned out he was nothing but a weakling. A disappointment cursed to carry only the name. Not worth worrying about. Meanwhile, back in the arena, Nanaku lunged forward, his sharp, shark-like fangs aiming for Che's face. The shadow of death loomed over him, and Che couldn't help but pale in terror. Was this how he would die? Where he would die? Bitten to death by a bloodthirsty shark? Nah, fuck all that. He wasn't going out like that. His sheer unwillingness became palpable, and he began hallucinating a figure walking up to him. Wait, was it really an illusion? It seemed too real. Just as Che was wondering if he was going mad, the figure before him suddenly opened his eyes. His burning irises flared as he roared at Che to wake up. He wouldn't be dying today. Outside in the real world, the arena suddenly burst into flames, illuminating the entire ground, crowd, and all. It became so blinding that those watching couldn't help but cover their eyes in horror, fearing they'd go blind. What the hell was this? What kind of sorcery was happening? Before they could piece anything together, more bad news hit. The barrier surrounding the arena was creaking, poised to shatter at any moment. The terrified audience could only imagine their grim fate if that happened. Helpless, they screamed for help, begging the strong Kimyos to save them. The gang heard this and said, "Say less." If they were looking for powerful Kimyos to help, they were their men. They quickly sprang into action, dispersing to save the crowd. Louise was first in the fray. He lunged forward, activating his Kimyo talent in the process. Dark, ash-like smoke gushed from his back, setting up a barrier to shield the audience. This was his Kimyo talent. Chichioya no Hai, I Papi, a range control ability. Unfortunately, despite how formidable the talent was, it wasn't enough to block the raging inferno. Bursts of flames broke through, targeting an innocent maiden with shiny twin peaks. Just as it seemed over for the angelic lady with the devilish body, a streak of green lightning flashed by, whisking her into its arms. The lightning was the manifestation of Shady Pastor Azam Ali's talent, haste. On the opposite side, Tevin was also doing his best to save civilians. His Kimyo talent was active, and he relied on his superior defense to tank the flames. However, regardless of what they were doing or who they were saving, they all had the same thought cross their minds. Wasn't this flame oddly similar to their masters? Just what the hell was going on? Meanwhile, in the arena, the once arrogant Nanaku wasn't acting so cocky anymore. His face had gone ghostly pale as he struggled for his life. Using debris as cover, he cautiously peeked to see what was going on. Then, as if realizing the truth, roared in rage. Didn't Che claim he was a regular human with no Kimyo talent? Then what the hell was this crap? Had he been deceived? Completely unforgivable. He would tear Che limb from limb for this mockery. He wanted to curse some more, but the sight before him left him stunned. The flames had died down, and Che's physique was finally visible. He looked divine, like a flame deity reincarnated into mortal flesh. Not to mention, he was packing some serious heat, literally, judging by the flames censoring the delicates. Confused by his transformation, Che took in his new form. His eyes darted across his body as he wondered why he didn't feel pain. His skin was melting, and he was on fire after all. The squad was equally stunned, unable to take their eyes off him. Was this a coincidence, or had their master done something? Che, on the other hand, marveled at his new body, feeling completely reborn. For some reason, he felt unstoppable, like he could crush anything and anyone. Speaking of crushing, where the hell was that fishtail bastard? As if reading his thoughts, Nanaku stepped forward to face him. His fury rose as he questioned Che. Had he been pretending before? Playing with him? Well, it didn't matter. He'd still kill him here. He shot forward, yelling for Che to die. From the stands, his boys screamed for him to get back. Was he insane? What the hell was he doing? Unfazed, Che watched the lunging Nanaku with disinterest. His god complex grew as he wondered how well the shark would burn. Would his skin and flesh char? Or would he be reduced to nothing but ash? There was only one way to find out. Ignoring Tevin's shouts to stop, Che raised his hand, prepared to burn Nanaku to a crisp. His palm glowed with divine might, ready to unleash hell on the ignorant foe. Meanwhile, in Rokash's private room, the villain was freaking the hell out. His scar throbbed as he suffered severe PTSD. Those flames. Was it Leo haunting him from the grave? Refusing to allow him even a second of peace? Damn that old man. Shifting back to Che, the newly risen Kimyo was out for blood. Without a shred of mercy, he lit Nanaku up, burning his fishy ass with a cyclone of divine flames. Anguished screams and pleading followed the attack, but Che ignored them and continued his merciless slaughter. Finally, when there was nothing left to burn and Nanaku's corpse was charred to a crisp, Che let up and retracted his flames. He didn't look away, as if etching the visage of the first being he'd ever killed into his memory. His eyes as cold as ice. By his side, Tevin watched the whole thing unfold in shock. He didn't know it then, but later in life, he would realize this moment marked the descent of Che Hart into darkness. So many regrets would accompany him with age, but this was undoubtedly the worst of them. Maybe he should have tried harder to reach out to Che, to let him know he wasn't alone, that it wasn't his burden to bear alone. Leo had been their master too, and it was on all of them to avenge him. If only he'd said that. If only he'd stood by Che's side during that troubling time. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe the world wouldn't have been painted with the blood of those he killed. Maybe he wouldn't have become humanity's greatest enemy. Too bad the past couldn't be changed, and all he had was the present, or, in this case, the future. Because these were the regrets of future Tevin. For now, however, they were still in the past. So it was better to slow down and enjoy the story gradually. With the death of Nanaku, a tense silence spread through the arena. There was always a chance of death in these battles, but no one thought it would come so quickly, or so brutally. It took the audience a good while to even register what had just happened. Meanwhile, the culprit stood there unfazed by the stairs burning into him. He casually powered down, dismissing the flames that cloaked his body. With their disappearance, the details of his talent became visible. It was the Ilios Phoenix Flame, or Sunfire talent. It allowed the user to enter the Ilios state, the same divine flame form seen earlier from both Che and Leo Thomas. In addition, it was categorized as one of the original 4 great talents. In other words, Che was about to pull mad bitches, burning maidens left and right. Okay, maybe not burn, but grill. Dude was about to grill some Caribbean cheeks. Moving on. Che, humanity's future greatest nemesis, finally retracted his talent and dropped to his knees. The strain from being in the Ilios state was far more draining than he'd expected, almost knocking him out. Luckily, he had just enough energy left to stay conscious, barely warding off the dizziness. Seeing this, Tevin snapped out of his shock and ran over, a cloth in hand. He hadn't forgotten that Che was still butt naked, showing his ass to literally thousands of people in the stands. Handing the cloth over, Tevin asked if he was okay, if his wounds were healing. Che replied that they were fine, though his body felt terrible. It was like he'd been tossed into a blender, then stitched back together, completely unbearable. Tevin sympathized, but then his face hardened. He demanded to know what the hell that was. Since when had they become murderous? Che lowered his head in shame. He had no excuse, at least not to someone he considered a brother. His lips twitched as if he wanted to speak, but ultimately, he stayed silent. Just as the tension between them started to thicken, a loud explosion went off in the room, drawing everyone's attention. The blast came from the private lounge reserved for Rokash. Realizing this, Everyone focused in that direction, including the cameras filming the live broadcast of the event. Che and the gang did the same, their eyes burning with murderous intent. As all attention zeroed in on the lounge, Rokash suddenly emerged, his aura radiating boundless joy. To think that bastard Leo actually had such a hidden card up his sleeve. What a cunning old fox. Gazing intently at Che, he roared, demanding to know how Leo had done it. How had he transferred his power to him? Would Che tell him, or would he have to pry the answer from his tortured corpse? Che didn't flinch. He met Rokash's gaze directly and warned him not to speak his master's name. He wasn't worthy of it. Laughing mockingly, Rokash asked what he would do if he did. Would he fight him? Did he really think that just because he got a little bit of power he was all that? Super hot fire? Nah, fuck that. In Rokash's eyes, he was still nothing more than a bug. He sneered, recalling him clearly. The inconsequential human who always clung to Leo's side. The powerless mortal who didn't even qualify to lick his feet. Gaining a talent didn't change that. At best, he was just a slightly bigger cockroach, still inconsequential and easy to kill, just like his master Leo. The moment those words left his mouth, loud gasps thundered across the arena. The crowd was stunned. Leo, the war hero, killed by his own former disciple? And that same disciple dumb enough to confess live on national TV? What a dumbass. Speaking of dumb, what kind of sins did this dude commit in his past life to be born that ugly? I know it's just a drawing, but damn, isn't that too much? What an unlucky bastard. Anyway, back to the drama. Ali, the shady pastor, practically rejoiced at Rokash's slip-up. They'd planned to beat the confession out of him, but who would have thought the cocky bastard would out himself? Wasn't this gift from Lady Luck a little too generous? What was next? A group of big booty Latinas calling him Papi. He wouldn't mind. He'd gladly manifest that shit. Anyway, back to Rokash, the still taunting fool. He kept shouting insults and daring the squad to come at him. He didn't fear their smoke, he welcomed it. He didn't mind sending them to an early reunion with their master. His taunts only stopped when his bodyguard revealed the grim truth. The idiot had just confessed to murder, on live television. Rokash's grin vanished. His brows tightened instantly. He didn't even get the chance to react before a squad of police officers burst in. Leading them was Inspector Ian Anthony, and he was pissed. He shouted at Rokash for his shamelessness, for daring to toy with them. The bastard knew their squad was in charge of investigating Leo's murder, yet Rokash had them guard the event. He'd killed Leo, thrown a party to celebrate it, and made them, the investigators, his security. Just how much did he intend to mock them? He'd pay for this insult. Noticing the rising tension, Rokash's bodyguard advised a retreat. They were still live on television, and killing cops in front of everyone wasn't exactly the best move. Rokash agreed and prepared to leave. Meanwhile, on the inspector's side, the entire squad drew their guns, shouting for Rokash to surrender. He was under arrest. As for his trusted bodyguard, he was ordered to step aside, unless he wanted to join Rokash in a cell. But Jonelli Honore wasn't having it. To hell with that peaceful bullshit, he wanted all the smoke. Confidently stepping forward, he shielded Rokash behind him. Then, under everyone's gaze, he activated his Kimyo talent, Akuma. A creation-type ability, Akuma allowed him to generate and shape metallic materials from his body, perfect for both offense and defense. Realizing Honore wouldn't back down, the officers lit his ass up. What last warning? The only warning he got was his one-way ticket to hell. They mercilessly opened fire, emptying their magazines into him. Unfortunately, Honore wasn't an easy nut to crack. He relied on his Akuma talent to effortlessly block every bullet. As for Rokash, the treacherous bastard used the chaos to slip away. He left some parting words for Che, but it was the same recycled trash talk as always. Nothing worth remembering. Che, however, had parting words of his own. With the live broadcast focused on him, he glared at the fleeing Rokash and stated coldly that he should run as far as he could. He should pray the police got to him first, because if Che did, he'd know torment, unlike anything else in the world. That would be his punishment for cutting short the life of the man who had raised them, their only father in this life. He warned him never to show his face again because he had just made his final mistake. Oh, and since the broadcast was still live, He'd like to give a shout out to Ray and Antoine. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. But kudos to anyone who got that reference. Back to the story. Rokash grinned sinisterly as he made his escape. He wasn't worried about Che's threat. In fact, he welcomed the smoke. So what if he'd killed the wolf and spared the cubs? What could they possibly do to him? They were just weaklings. If the opportunity came, he'd crush them completely, along with their stupid superhero poses. Who did they think they were? The Avengers. Fast forward 4 months later. The incident hadn't died down. It had only escalated. Rokash was still in hiding, evading the police and the domino effects of Leo's murder. After his open confession, the world now knew his crimes, and that a Kimyo had used his powers outside the arena to kill someone. This led to widespread panic and fear among the general populace, fueling growing tension between humans and Kimyos. Several skirmishes broke out, and this was just the beginning. Across the country, bans on Kimyos and their talents grew harsher, further deteriorating the situation. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that things were hanging by a thread, and another Kimyo versus human war wasn't far off. Such was the state of the world. Watching all this unfold on a smartphone, a lone figure sighed in annoyance. Kimyos and humans fighting? Discrimination and vigilante attacks rising? Businesses refusing to serve Kimyos because they were non-human? If they'd known the mess Rokash would create by killing Leo, they would have killed that bastard themselves. At least it would have saved the world from going crazy. Too bad it was too late now. Either way, it wouldn't stop them from fulfilling their mission. They had a task, to locate the golden boy himself, Che motherfucking Hart. Enter the main waifu of the story, and damn, she was smoking. Putting on her earphones, the waifu continued to mull over the current situation. Although she understood where the humans were coming from, she couldn't help but think they were making a mistake. Fear had clouded their judgment. What did they expect to happen if they kept discriminating against the Kimyos? Push them past their limits? It was obvious things wouldn't end well. But alas, humans were creatures of war. They had no appreciation for peace, nor the faintest idea how to maintain it. It wouldn't be a surprise if the world went to shit at this rate. Walking onward, the lady chastised the foolish humans and the naive ones who thought war breaking out was somehow a good thing. They'd been so drunk on peace that they deluded themselves into believing the last war had happened ages ago. But that wasn't the case at all. The Great War hadn't been that long ago, and the consequences and horrors it brought were still clear to anyone who paid enough attention. Speaking of war, let's dive a bit into the lore of this world. Back in the day, Kimyos and humans were at each other's throats, vying desperately for dominion over the world. Ever since the appearance of the first Kimyo in 1542, and the subsequent propagation of their species to nearly a third of the population, they had always believed they deserved to be the dominant race. They had superpowers and were strong as hell. Why would they need to bow to mere humans? That belief steadily spread, leading to an all-out war. For the more radical Kimyos, it wasn't just about dominance. It was about the complete annihilation of the human race, or as they called it, the purification of the bloodline. Thus, war broke out, forcing humans to band together just to barely hold the Kimyos back. Through countless sacrifices, they fought for their land, their people, while all the Kimyos did was slaughter and massacre. However, not all Kimyos followed this path. The many who did were corrupted, led, and influenced by one man, Cain, the strongest Kimyo and the father of the rebellion. Cain's power was beyond imagination. In the present day, the top 150 Kimyos are ranked and revered, but even among them, there's a massive difference between those in the top 10 and everyone else. The ones powerful enough to be in the top 10 are termed God tier, and Cain was ranked first among them. His power was overwhelming, and through his strength and influence alone, he managed to wage a war that lasted 124 years, finally ending in 1957. Surprisingly, despite his overwhelming might, Cain met his end in the most unexpected way: assassination. Now, I know what you're thinking. How the hell did Cain, the Big Papi, the numero uno of the big bads, fall to something like that? Well, the answer's simple. He fell by the hands of the war heroes. And who were the war heroes, you ask? Come closer, because I'm about to tell you. I won't gatekeep this shit. In 1942, East Kuva, Trinidad and Tobago, a group of children were assembled. Children who, unbeknownst to anyone, would one day shape the course of history. Left in charge of these kids was a menacing yet oddly seductive maiden, the lovely Colonel Catherine Forbes, better known in the streets as the Achilles. Catherine, despite her reservations, took in these kids, who were, unbelievably, new recruits for the war. In other words, child soldiers. She didn't like sending kids off to die, but the orders came from above, and the military was desperate. She had no choice. Gazing at the solemn faces of the children, she informed them that she would be their commanding officer from then on. It was her duty to make sure as many of them as possible survived and made it back home. Sure, some of them had signed up because their families and homes were destroyed, but she believed that as long as they lived, there was still hope. If they could just make it back alive, it wouldn't be too late to build another home. Growing more serious, she explained how their training would proceed. The few who were Kimyos would be trained separately from the regular recruits, but full effort was expected from both groups. Only then would they stand a chance against Cain, and maybe restore the world to the peace it once knew. Fast forward a few days later, and the story shifts to the perspective of a young trainee in the camp. After being there for a while, the place began to grow on him. He was fed, clothed, and treated well, something rare for an orphan and refugee like himself. Still, sometimes he couldn't help but wonder, why had he volunteered to come here? What was he searching for? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He felt safe here, and that was enough. He was tired of seeing death. As he mulled over his life, a voice called out, breaking his thoughts. Looking up, he was surprised to see a girl his age, accompanied by her brother. She introduced herself as Elsa, and the boy as Kevin, orphans, just like him. They'd sought him out because he was too quiet. Everyone else was already getting along, but he kept to himself. Then, with the innocence only children possess, Elsa asked to be friends. Everyone needed company, after all. Blushing, the young boy quickly agreed, though deep down, he was a sly dog, secretly marveling at how pretty she was. Fast forward again, and trouble finally found the peaceful encampment. Several Kimyos attacked, reducing the land to a world of smoke and ash. Catherine was quickly evacuated from her tent, but judging by the scowl on her face, she was furious. How had those bastards found their location? It was supposed to be secret. Had someone snuck a spy into their ranks? If she found that bastard, she'd make sure to step on his face, which to some might sound like a reward. But fuck it, she'd do it anyway. Sensing her rage, one of the soldiers tried to cheer her up, reporting that the major had already been informed of the attack and had arrived to provide backup. Catherine visibly perked up at the news and ordered to be taken to him immediately. Enter Major Jamie Altham, better known in the streets as the Wolf Spider. Catherine met the war veteran and reported honestly, there was a spy among them. Someone was feeding intel to the enemy, including the location of their base. Jamie sighed. The last thing he wanted to deal with today was betrayal. Still, orders were orders. Headquarters was sending in an airstrike. They just had to hold out until then. As they spoke, several soldiers rushed in, bringing with them the children, except for 3 who were still missing. Jamie's expression sharpened. He commanded the troops to fall back. He'd find the kids himself. Catherine didn't stop him. She simply cheered him on, telling him to give them hell. And she had good reason to be confident. Jamie was a monster in his own right. A Kimyo. When faced with a gang of third-rate villain Kimyos, yeah, the kind that say dumb shit like this, Jamie didn't even flinch. He activated his Kimyo talent, blitzing through the crowd in an instant. By the time he paused, the entire group was bound and helpless, whimpering for mercy. Jamie showed none. He diced them like meat for the devil's dinner. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the camp, the sly boy and his newfound crush were hiding. After escaping from the Kimyos, they holed up in a crumbling building, but they both knew it wouldn't hold for long. Scared, Elsa asked if they'd be okay. The boy assured her they would, but not if they stayed. They had to keep moving. He promised to protect her and Kevin, no matter what. And just as he finished making that promise, fate laughed in his face. They were discovered. A patrolling Kimyo spotted them, forcing the trio to flee. Terrified, they ran with everything they had, But it was clear. Someone had to stay behind to buy time. Stealing his resolve, the boy told them to go on without him. He'd hold the line. Elsa tried to argue, but he reminded her of his promise. He intended to keep it. Then, to her shock, he burst into flames, charging headfirst into the fray. Using his flame talent, he unleashed chaos, burning everything unfortunate enough to stand in his path. Divine flames towered into the sky, mingled with the anguished screams of the dying. At the same time, in another part of the battlefield, Jamie was also facing off against his fair share of enemies. Crimson threads of death blanketed the ground, dicing every Kimyo that crossed his path. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Flames. The entire camp was burning. Fearing for the missing children, Jamie finished off the remaining foes and ran toward the fire, calling their names. But nothing could have prepared him for what he found: death, flames, and destruction. And at the center of it all stood a young boy, baptized in blood and ash, surrounded by hundreds of corpses. That boy's name was Leo Thomas, and his story had just begun. Shifting back to the present, we're reunited with the homie Che Hart. After his successful Kimyo transformation, he seemed to have put on more muscle mass, practically bursting out of his tank top, with enough veins to tie down an ox. Goddamn. What didn't change, however, were his feelings toward his slain master, Leo Thomas. Occasionally, he would look at their pictures together, reminiscing about the good old days, back when it was just the three of them. How wonderful those days were. Speaking of good old days, we get another flashback to 1957, Trinidad, in the middle of the Kimyo versus human war. After fighting bravely and relentlessly against the Kimyo army, the human side was inevitably suppressed, pinned down for an eventual slaughter. Morale plummeted drastically, leading the soldiers to question their leader. When were they going to give the command to retreat? They were on the brink of being wiped out, goddammit. To this, the sergeants could only grit their teeth and tell them to wait. Help was on the way. The soldiers called bullshit on that. What kind of help could possibly turn this shit show around? If they had that much firepower, why didn't they deploy it earlier? The sergeant simply told them to have faith. All they had to do was wait, and everything would make sense. The soldiers almost lost their shit at that reply. They were about to lose their lives. What could possibly be worth that risk? Just as they were about to crash out, an aircraft engine roared from above, heralding the arrival of reinforcements. When the soldiers saw who had come to rescue them, they couldn't help but exclaim in shock. Had that hero really come to aid them? But if so, did that mean he came as well? While they were still processing it, the reinforcement, Major Altham, also known as the Spider Wolf, let it rip, blitzing the battlefield with a machine gun. Thanks to the blessing of lead, the enemy forces were swiftly decimated, drastically reducing the pressure on the Allied side. However, not all tangos were eliminated. The big, bad, and ugly managed to survive, mounting a counterattack on the aircraft. Realizing this, Altham, the Spider Wolf, clicked his tongue in annoyance before addressing his co-pilot. It was his time to shine. The co-pilot agreed and unfastened his seatbelt, switching to active support mode. He climbed out of the cockpit, scaling up the aircraft until he was standing atop the wings. Under Altham's constant urging and taunts, he began charging a big move, planning to buy their troops an opening to retreat. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Lava Kimyo, part of the big, bad, and especially ugly, finished preparing his attack and asked for permission to light the aircraft up. With his firepower, he was sure bringing down those bastards wouldn't be a problem. Unfortunately, he was just a second too late. By the time his attack was ready, an even more formidable and terrifying blast was already raining down toward them. The entire battlefield lit up like an erupting volcano, death, ash, and destruction everywhere. Wherever the flames went, annihilation followed, leaving looks of awe and reverence on the soldiers' faces. Was this the promised reinforcement? No wonder the sergeant told them to have faith. Who wouldn't have faith in such overwhelming power? But that aside, was it really him? That flame, that absurd destructive power. Who else could it be but the kid Altham adopted? The one and only Leo freaking Thomas, now grown up and sporting a more mature vibe. Unfortunately for Altham, mature didn't mean responsible. Leo recklessly tossed away his helmet and oxygen mask, saying they made him look less cool. What was the point of saving allies if he couldn't look cool doing it? How else was he supposed to pull bitches? To this, Altham could only grit his teeth in irritation, praying to the heavens that this thirsty bastard would grow up soon. Cursing his shitty luck, he hadn't even finished regretting adopting this maiden-obsessed lunatic when Leo came with more troubling news. He planned to jump off the plane and crash land on the battlefield, thinking he'd be more useful through a hands-on approach. Why blast them from the air when he could just blitz them with the old left-right goodnight? Incredulous, Altham told him to stop spewing nonsense. If he jumped off that plane, forget the fall, he'd kill him himself. Regrettably, Leo wasn't keen on listening to orders. How could he, when flexing and maiden-pulling points were waiting for him down below? He faked an accident before jumping straight off the plane, all under Altham's furious roars and curses. Halfway to the ground, the craziness of his plan finally hit him, and he couldn't help but regret it. Damn it, he should have at least kept the mask on. What a foolish way to go. Definitely not cool at all. Meanwhile on the ground, the Kimyos watching couldn't help but notice the absurdity, shocked that anyone could be that stupid. But hey, what did it have to do with them? At best, they could light his ass up and save him from the agony of splattering to his death. Shifting scenes, we're taken to an abandoned building at the rear of the battlefield, where an interrogation is underway. Conducting said interrogation is Major Altham, the Spider Wolf, rumored to be the last person you'd ever want interrogating you. True to reputation, the captive only endured half the torture before folding like a fan, promising to snitch on everything he knew, and even some things he didn't, just to get this psycho away from him. Altham didn't seem surprised and readily accepted his surrender. However, as he stood up, an intense killing intent flashed briefly in his eyes. He told the captive he was wise and reasonable. Too bad he couldn't say the same about the rest of his squad. Above them hung dozens of corpses, all bound and wrapped, having likely suffered excruciating pain before their inevitable demise. Grinning evilly, he told the captive to start talking. He needed to get back to the battlefield. Who knew what kind of shit show that troublesome Leo was stirring up? He had to return before the kid burned the whole place to the ground. Fast forward to after the battle. We're reunited with Colonel Catherine Forbes, and the muscle mommy is looking as menacing and sexy as ever. Joining her is the Spider Wolf, back from his mission. Impressed by his report, Catherine praised Altham for a job well done before shifting the conversation to Leo, asking how he was doing. She'd heard a lot of good things about him. The soldiers couldn't stop glazing him, especially the maidens, who thought he'd grown up into a total poppy. Altham replied that Leo was faring well, albeit a little careless, but he was confident the boy would grow out of it soon enough. Intrigued, Catherine teased him for his dedication to Leo. He might say he was just guiding the kid, but they both knew he saw him as something like a younger brother. Altham didn't deny it but added that wasn't the only reason for his concern. Leo was dangerous. Out of all the Kimyos he'd ever seen, Leo's destructive power was unmatched. He was practically a walking sun. If not nurtured properly, he could become a serious threat to the entire human race. Catherine nodded gravely and changed the topic. It was time to discuss why she'd called him in. Another of Kane's military air bases had been discovered, and it was his mission to bring it down, including the 13 working carrier planes that had to be destroyed no matter what. They couldn't let Kane get his hands on them. It would be disastrous for their troops. As for who would join him on the mission, the answer was no one. Their forces were spread too thin. However, he could bring Leo along if he wished. Speaking of Leo, the moment he saw his master, he immediately started glazing. He bragged about his excellent battlefield performance, claiming that everyone considered him a hero. In fact, many believed he should get his own plane, to fight battles of course, and not to pick up waifus. But if the opportunity arose, why shouldn't he? Altham ignored him and told him to get ready. With his recklessness, he wouldn't trust him with a can opener, let alone a fighter jet. Still, if he performed well on this mission, he might consider letting him fly on their way back home. Leo immediately lit up at the news, his eyes literally shining. He promised Altham he'd do his best, so his master better not go back on his word. Then, like an excited puppy, he scurried off to prepare. Busy with the task, he didn't notice someone creeping up on him. Only when they spoke did he realize their presence. That someone, unbelievably, was the maiden Elsa, now grown up and radiant as ever. And maybe it's just me, but she kinda looks like a dude. Wait, could this be a trap? Run, Leo, run. Or maybe stay. Depends on what you like. Leaning in, Elsa, the possible trap, kissed Leo and warned him not to die. If he foolishly got himself killed, she'd follow him into heaven just to beat his ass. Leo readily agreed, promising to make it back no matter what. But when he did, she better get ready with that sucky, because it was about to be a meat buffet in this bitch. Shifting scenes again, we're taken to the East Air Base, their target. After landing half a mile away, the duo of master and apprentice made their way toward the base. Though it was crawling with enemies, just like this bootleg Black Wolverine, or Blackarine, the pair made quick work of them, slaughtering their way to the destination. However, when they arrived, things took an unexpected twist. The countless civilians previously reported missing were all imprisoned there, for reasons unknown. Too young and inexperienced to grasp the gravity of the situation, Leo grinned widely, already picturing the rewards and fame. If he managed to complete the mission successfully, forget the merits. Who knew what freaky shit Elsa might do to him? To that, he could only say, "Arigato gozaimasu." Altham, on the other hand, was sharp enough to know this didn't bode well. If that bastard Kane was taking hostages, there had to be a reason, and it sure as hell wasn't a good one. They had to report back to HQ, but first, a little more investigation was in order. Sneaking deeper into the base, they aimed to uncover more secrets, but what they found instead left them terrified. Right there before them stood the source of their nightmares, the devil himself, the publicly acknowledged strongest Kimyo to ever walk the earth. Kane, the demon Kimyo. Horrified, Altham almost shit his pants. He racked his brain, trying to figure out how this was possible. Wasn't Kane supposed to be overseas? Then why was he here, in such an unassuming airbase of all places? He didn't know what was going on, but one thing was certain. They had to get the hell out of there. Kane the demon wasn't a foe they could handle, especially not on their own. Thus, without hesitation, they quickly fled, radioing back to headquarters for reinforcements. After chopping it up with the big dogs at HQ, specifically the muscle mommy Catherine, an order was swiftly passed down. They argued that meeting Kane, although extremely dangerous, was too much of an opportunity to pass up. The best course of action was to mobilize the entire army and besiege him. Hopefully, they'd stand a chance at bringing down the menace for good. Regrettably, things weren't that simple. At the rate the planes were loading up, Kane would be gone in 30 minutes, let alone the hour needed to assemble the army. Thus, if they needed to force him to stay and later implement the siege tactic, Leo and Altham would have to stall for time, meaning the two of them would be facing off against Earth's mightiest Kimyo. Realizing this, a crazed grin spread across Altham's face. To face off against the strongest and hopefully not die. Could there be a better legacy than that? And even if they did die, could there be a better death for war dogs like them? He welcomed the challenge. His fighting spirit surged. Acting on that hype, they set to work. First blitzing the shit out of Kane's men. The group of normies didn't even react before they were stabbed in the head. Next came Kane, but the strongest Kimyo wasn't an easy nut to crack. The second the attacks landed, he was already moving, preparing a counterattack. With seamless ease, he flicked his hand, effortlessly squashing Leo's fireball. The attack couldn't even get close before it was intercepted and snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Enter the strongest talent, Thanatos, a psychic-type ability. The exact details had never been accurately recorded, but the general consensus was that it was powerful as fuck. When wielded correctly, it supposedly had the power to end all life on Earth and anywhere else. In short, Kane was him. And so long as he lived, he'd undoubtedly be the biggest cheek clapper on the planet. Back to the fight. Kane finally broke his silence. His voice was grating and layered, sounding like 1,000 souls talking simultaneously. If that's hard to imagine, picture me and my 1,000 huzz whispering in your ear. Because, as we all know, I get bitches. Anyway, with that grating voice, Kane asked who they were. The army? Feeling the pressure and trying to diffuse the tension, the duo replied jokingly that they were evangelists, here to chat about their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And if he wasn't of that religion, he should forget the joke and come at them. Kane said, "Bet," and squared off, finally giving a full view of his magnificence. Turns out he was a 7-foot behemoth, which, in my opinion, is unnecessary. No one needs to be that tall, especially if he's already this cool looking. Come on, can he leave some maidens for us? How are short kings like us supposed to clap with such competition? Anyway, Short King rant aside, the face-off continued. Through his weird demon-like face, Cain demanded an answer. Were they from the army or not? Or alternatively, were they just two random soldiers who'd snuck in to pledge allegiance to the mighty him? Altham replied that they were neither. They were just two reckless fools who'd come in search of a good fight, and, if necessary, a good death. Cain picked up on their sarcasm and decided not to waste any more time. He stretched out his hand and activated his talent, Thanatos. Loud warning bells sounded in the duo's minds, forcing them to dodge frantically. In the spot they'd once stood, a huge explosion carved out a massive crater. The duo sighed in relief, but Cain wasn't done. With another flick of his hand, the ground tore apart, writhing to life like it had a mind of its own. Their target was Leo, dazed and confused by the absurd changes. Just as the wave-like concrete was about to smash him whole, Leo finally snapped out of it and evaded successfully, using his Ilios talent to propel forward and barely save himself. However, Cain wasn't keen on letting him escape. For every wave Leo dodged, 3 more took its place, soon trapping him in an ocean of concrete waves. Things became increasingly dire, leaving Leo with no way out. Finally, after a careless mistake and some bad luck, Leo's leg was trapped, leaving him at the mercy of Cain's barrage. The concrete waves closed in around him, sealing him in a tomb of stone and death. Luckily, Leo wasn't alone. In his time of need, his master answered the call, pushing his power to the limit. Exerting maximum force, Altham swung his strings like a madman, successfully dicing through the concrete. In addition to freeing Leo, he diverted some of his strings toward Cain, foiling his ambush with the giant serpent. Thus, Leo was free, and once again ready to wreak havoc on the battlefield. Without hesitation, he charged Cain, shooting flame bursts through the air. As he did, Altham gave him more intel about Cain and his Kimyo talent, Thanatos. Legend had it that it was by far the strongest talent, requiring 3 talents of equal strength just to barely contend with it. Undoubtedly, it wasn't something they could handle alone, so their mission today was survival. Stall for time until reinforcements arrived. Leo nodded and fired a massive fireball at Cain. For anyone else, that would have been enough, but Cain easily tanked it and counterattacked immediately. From the flames burst out the serpent, lunging for Leo's face. The sudden ambush scared the shit out of him, leaving little time to react, but luckily his reflexes were strong, barely enabling him to dodge at the last second. Seeing this, Altham shouted a worried reminder, "Don't get bitten by the serpent." He explained that the serpent was part of Cain's skill, and getting bitten by it was the same as having your soul sucked. Pause. Seriously though, the serpent was Cyberus, the Great Serpent, and its power was to absorb any soul for its master Cain. Realizing Altham had more intel on him than he'd thought, Cain spawned before them, hands ready to attack. He wasn't particularly worried about the two, but a quick resolution was wise. Thus he activated his ability again, ready to blow the duo to smithereens. The two could only grit their teeth and fight desperately, buying time for the reinforcements. Speaking of reinforcements, we shift back to the main camp where a whole battalion was assembling. Leading them was the familiar Colonel Catherine Forbes, #1 muscle mommy and certified war maiden of the army. With her trusty, low-key, super cool war axe in hand, she gave orders to march. One of the lieutenants called out, asking how many tanks they should bring along. Catherine answered without hesitation, "Bring every goddamn last one of them. In fact, so long as it had wheels and could attack, they should bring it. Even a slingshot strapped to a unicycle would be useful at this point." The lieutenants saluted, indicating they understood. However, there was one troubling matter she needed to be made aware of. He explained that during Leo's call he'd mentioned Cain's men were loading cargo planes. Judging by the plane's capacity and the assumed speed of the loaders, it would take approximately 30 minutes to finish. But the army was more than an hour away, meaning Leo and Altham would be forced to fight Cain to stall for time. He told her that even as they were standing there, Leo and Altham were probably already engaged in battle with Cain, a surefire suicidal move, as she knew all too well. True to that deduction, At the base, Leo and Altham were locked in a desperate fight. They threw everything they had at him, barely escaping death by a hair's breadth. Leo charged in with a sidekick whipping toward Kane's face, but Kane effortlessly dodged, grabbed Altham, and blasted both master and disciple halfway across the room. When they landed, they scraped along the ground like trash, finally crashing to a halt in pitiful positions. This was especially true for Leo, who, for some reason, had his cheeks arched up as if he were waiting for something. Pause. Just as he was about to get up from his sussy position, Leo noticed something that made his face drop. Civilians, loads of them, locked in cages. This enraged him, partly because of the inhumane treatment, but mostly because, with them around, he couldn't fully unleash his Ilios talent, lest he burn them all to death. Picking up on his strained expression, Kane immediately guessed what was going on. In a mocking tone, he asked if Leo knew any of them. Were there perhaps loved ones of his in there as well? Altham replied for Leo, "Don't fuck with them." They were not interested in Kane's petty threats or psychological games. Using the brief second Kane was distracted, Altham infused a significant amount of energy into the ground, preparing for a sneak attack. When everything was ready and Kane was still spewing his recruitment speech, Altham let it rip, tagging the strings he'd buried underground. The strings led back to Kane, trapping him in a prison of crimson thread. His whole body was immobilized, seized and controlled like a puppet. Seeing this, Leo prepared his trump card. He infused a significant amount of energy into Altham's dagger, morphing it into a giant claymore of flames. The heat wave from the blade swept through the room, giving everyone a taste of its power. As for Leo, he was already on the move, charging toward Kane with murderous intent. Just as he was about to launch his finisher, Kane, who'd been trapped and silent this whole time, spoke for the first time. He sighed at their stubbornness, refusing recruitment even when he was asking nicely. Well, there was nothing left to do. He'd just have to kill them now. Saying so, he easily broke free from the trap, proving he'd never really been trapped, and gave the duo no time to react, sending his serpent lunging for the advancing Leo. Altham's face changed drastically. He shouted for Leo to be careful. They'd fallen for a trap, but it was already too late. Cyberus had locked onto Leo's soul. Acting on instinct, Altham shot out his fastest strings, hoping to reach Leo in time. Luckily, they wrapped around him and yanked Leo from the serpent's jaws. Enraged, Kane turned his fury on the hostages. Since the duo insisted on meddling with his plans, he'd take out his anger on them. He'd kill them all. Their blood would be on the hands of the meddlesome duo. Alarmed, Leo rushed to intercept. Although he knew it was a trap, deliberate bait Kane had cast, he couldn't stop himself from falling for it. Against better judgment, he dashed to the front of the cage, planning to use himself as a meat shield. Gritting his teeth, he apologized to Elsa in his mind, realizing this might be the end, and he wouldn't keep his promise to her. He also felt bad about the missed sucky. But what else could he do? He was a hero. This was what heroes did. He steeled himself for the inevitable. But just as things seemed over, a string shot in and wrapped around him tightly. Against his will, the string yanked him back, pulling him from the cage. Following the sudden twist came a gentle voice calling him stupid. Did he really think they'd let him sacrifice himself? To this, Leo cried bitterly, telling Altham not to do it. This was his sacrifice to make. Altham ignored him and continued to pull, then with steady resolve stepped up to take his place. He told Leo to live on. This wouldn't be where he died. His purpose in life was grander than Altham's, so he had to survive no matter what. With tears in his eyes, he told Leo he would be the hero to save the world, and that guiding him and standing beside him as a brother were the greatest moments of his life. Finished with his tearful goodbye, he roared at Kane to come at him. If Kane wanted to harm the hostages, he'd have to get through Altham first. Kane sneered at the pitiful resistance, calling it a meaningless sacrifice. What good would one fool possibly do against his power? Fine, he'd just kill them all, hostages and all.